Hello and welcome to my review of The Dracula Illusion, a 2022 novel from Scott Alexander. And if that name sounds familiar to you, then yes, it is the very same Scott that has appeared on this channel, which is why we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. I'm over here in the Fortress of Scorn. This is a place that I usually use for my reviews of people's internet poetry, but today I'm going to be instead looking at the reviews of The Dracula Illusion. As you can see, they're generally favourable. We have a 61% of people reviewing things with 5 stars, with 11 giving 1 stars, and you tend to find that with Amazon reviews, that things tend to cluster at either end of the spectrum. It's very rare you find people are moved to review something by it being average and therefore giving it 3 stars. It typically tends to be super hyped or really, really angry. So we're going to start with the negatives. The title of this review is Pompous, and it's a short review. It reads, "Sorry, not for me, it's all over the place, pretentious and arty for the sake of it, and full of weak-minded characters, and why do all vamps lately have to be pansexual?" And with regard to the last comment, without getting into the whole debate of what's what, there is no suggestion that Xander, who is the vampire in the book, is pansexual. In defence of this reviewer, I do think that perhaps Xander, the vampire, for him it's not, I don't think that it's a particularly sexual act. I don't think he's getting any gratification from the sexual part of the act. It is purely about power. So he may well, as there's more and more people in the world identifying as neither male or female, I don't think that he would care what they thought. It would purely be about manipulating them into doing what he wanted to them. So I think that there's some defence of that point, although I don't agree with it in regards to the first book. If we take the second half of the second sentence and we're looking at full of weak-minded characters, I don't agree with that at all. It's quite clear as you read the book that the main character is being manipulated. And I thought that it was actually handled quite well. It wasn't like you see in certain books where there's a switch thrown and somebody suddenly becomes completely different. There's this gradual breakdown of the character's will. And it starts with initial touches where he'll take Xander's point of view, even when Xander's not there, and argue with people that he's no longer and better that disagree with it. So I thought that it was a nice gradual build-up, and the general destruction of his psyche is, I think, I thought it was one of the strengths of the book. It was really well done. The part of this review that does make me chuckle a little bit, I'm sorry, Scott, is the first part, the pretentious and arty for the sake of it. And the sake of it part is definitely not true, because I know Scott, and I know that he wouldn't want to create just another vampire story. He would want to do something different. He would want to explore different things and try different things in a literary way, because that's just who he is. To write just another vampire book, you're very unlikely to rise above the millions and millions and millions of other vampire books that are already out there, already doing that, and most of them are terrible. So you have to have something that sets you apart. If it elevates you, that's great, but it has to be, I'm trying something different. Otherwise, what is the point? There is nothing that you can really bring to the vampire genre that hasn't been done before, because it's been so popular for so long, with so many people writing in it. What I think that the review here is talking about is the various switches in genre that take place in the book. There is one that I would have argued against doing, which is in the middle of it. There's one of the characters says, I'm just going to point you in the direction of an essay that was written on this subject, and then for about 4 pages, it's not long, there's basically that essay, but it is pertinent to what's going on in the plot. So it isn't bad. It's just, I do think that a lot of people, particularly those casual readers, are going to get to that point and be a little bit like, what just happened? This is not something I've seen in a book before, but I think that's kind of the point. There is a bit where part of the story is related as a play. So what you can see with that is that it is dialogue heavy. Like, this would be a serious monologue even for Shakespeare. So what I think the reasoning was behind that, if you want actually to do an exposition dump through dialogue, how do you do that and not make it boring? Because it nearly always is. So to try and think of another way of doing that, I think is admirable. Again, I think that the casual reader might well reach this point and go, what just happened? And there is mileage in that you want to shock and surprise in a vampire book, I think. And how do you do that when the genre is so played out? The only thing I would have done differently to that is that I would have made the distinction, as you'll see in Shakespeare, in that the highborn, which in this case would be Xander, would talk in iambic pentameter. And that the lowborn, which in this case is his vassal Archie, would be presented as prose. That's the only difference I would have made to that. I think it's a really worthy, thoughtful way of trying to present a really dialogue-heavy scene in a different sort of way. And I do accept that the people that are looking for something a bit arty and a little bit, what's going on here, will enjoy it. And I think that the people that are looking for something that's a much more surface level vampire book will be put off for it. It will be for some people and not for some people. I think that this is important for Scott. I know him. And I don't think that he would want to just make a throwaway book. And by not making a throwaway book, you have to accept as an author, as a publisher, you will alienate some percentage of your reader. And if we look at the statistics at the top, we can clearly see that if you include the 2-star ratings, and perhaps 1 in every 5 who's picked this up to read it has hit that stumbling block of just the genre switching and the trying out different ways of presenting a story. I'm more inclined to agree with the top half of these reviewers, as the majority have. So we're going to have a look at this one, which is the next lowest ranked review, which says something in itself as well, in that it's 4 stars. You can forget your Twilights and your Blades. A Dracula illusion dispenses with the flashy and romantic to give us a novel far more in keeping with Bram Stoker's classic. Partly historical and partly bang up to date, the story shows us the life of immortal vampire Xander and slowly reveals his plans for the future. Xander is debonair, persuasive and sophisticated. Through a book dedicated to himself, he really is the narcissist's narcissist. He explores philosophy, politics and art through the ages, placing everything in context with his life as a vampire. There's gore and terror, but the horror for me came mostly from the more psychological aspects, the influence Xander holds over people, and the sense of inevitability that his plans will succeed. For readers who like a more cerebral take on the vampire, this will provide plenty of food for thought. Could it be a metaphor for political influence or substance addiction? I'll leave you to make up your own mind, something Xander himself would never allow. This more or less sums up my thoughts on the book, apart from the last bit. Could it be a metaphor for political influence or substance addiction? The political influence part is stated. It is textual rather than subtextual. It's literally stated. So I don't really think that I would say it was a metaphor. Metaphor would be suggested, I think. There is gore and terror. There's a little bit. It's not a significant part of the book. As stated here, yeah, that horror comes from losing the sense of yourself, losing the sense of your own free will, and the fact that Xander revels in it makes him a great antagonist. Some of the things he talks about, including the politics, which I already discussed, the philosophy and art, again might have contributed to that. It's a bit all over the place. But it's always with a view to character and plot, to show the sense of somebody's will imposed over another, particularly the art thing, which sort of sets the book off. Forgetting about Twilights and Blades, yeah, this isn't a teenage girl vampire book. It's specifically, and again, stated, textual, that it is opposed to that representation of the vampire. One of the things that drives Xander is the depiction of the vampire in film and book has annoyed him. He dislikes it intensely, and that really comes across. Is it in keeping with Bram Stoker's classic? You do get in Bram Stoker's like that gradual, like you see with Renfield, the end result of having your identity taken away. And you see that is kind of the threat to Mina and Jonathan at various times. But not much more than that, because Bram Stoker is creating the mythos. This is just using it. And it also uses the mythos of Bram Stoker himself, with Xander taking credit for having influenced in part Dracula, which I have to say I didn't like that part of it very much. It's just too powerful a figure, like Bram Stoker, too powerful a figure in this genre to be claiming ownership of it for yourself. I think there's a danger in that as an author, to put yourself on that level. So this is the last one I'll look at. It says, well-researched and compelling. Like Nabokov's Lolita, this book creates an elegant, welcoming setting, sets you, the reader, at ease, and then proceeds to drag you deep into its horrifying narrative. Dedicated to vampire lovers everywhere, it delivers on that promise, exploring the nature of the vampire, debunking the more fabulously and carelessly accumulated myths, presenting something truly chilling, amoral, and inhumane. Reminiscent of Van Huysen's Against Nature in its seduction of the reader, this is a book which, though in part contemporary, has no truck with the modern trivialization and glamorization of the vampire. The result is something far more compelling and almost haunting, imaginative and blackly humorous, with a strong, hypnotic, seductive sexual energy and absolutely no moral compass. With comparisons with Lolita, you have to be kind of careful because of the subject matter of Lolita. I've reviewed it on this channel, so by all means check that video out. But the welcoming setting, I don't know if twee's the right word, but Robert's life as mundane job, 2 up, 2 down, home, girlfriend, doing trappings of normality together, it's clear to me that Robert feels there's no value in a lot of that. Not all, but he's clearly looking for something more. So this elegant and welcoming setting, I actually got the opposite from that. I actually thought that it's a critique almost of that 9-to-5 grind, weekends, drunk, socialising, 9-to-5 grind, next weekend the same, that sort of treadmill. And Robert's attempts to break that, however, are almost what lands him in trouble. If he didn't decide to quit his job and go to an art gallery instead on that specific day, he never would have met Xander, or perhaps he would, because it's clear, I think, that Xander would have arranged that meeting if he identified in him through some other means that he was not a willing vassal, but you know what I mean, like available to. It's almost like the Jedi mind trick. You have to be amenable to that approach. And I think that Robert's rejection, his dislike of that life that, well, basically 99% of his lead, I think that's what makes him amenable, but it also means that is not supposed to be an elegant or welcoming setting, at least at the start. There is, again, a contrast at times between a very pastoral or rural or pleasantly visual environment with despicable acts. So that might be what they're getting at here, and that part of it I would agree with. The well-researched, yes, in fact, Scott at times credits in the book with a bibliography. I probably would never do that. I would leave that intertextuality to those that have read those sources, and that they would then be the reward for that effort on their part, if you like, would be a greater appreciation or a greater enjoyment of the text. And the others wouldn't lose anything by not. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. And some of you might question my bias here. I think Scott knows me well enough to know that, given some of our back and forths in the past, he knows that I would be honest with him if I didn't. So I recommend this book, definitely. I really enjoyed it. And that is so rare in the vampire genre. The vampire genre is full of drivel. It's so hard to find something that actually tries to do something different. This book does that. It's so hard to find something that tries to do something and succeeds. This book does that. It will not be for everyone. Take these numbers as your recommendation. There is an 80% chance 4 out of 5 people that take my recommendation and buy this book will enjoy it by these numbers alone. Check this out. I've got an author's copy. The new one comes with the cover that's been here for most of this video. So mine is a collector's edition. Do you know it's not signed? I've been gypped. Bastard.